Goodman Podcast. Today we got John Peterson. Awesome to have you on, John. Thank you for coming today. Tell us, who is John Peterson?
So I guess start with now. I'm running a certain group, the Green Data Center Guide, and I'm doing a lot in the data center space and everything data centers. But it's not just getting them done, it's making the improvements that we've been talking about for decades now on the sustainability front. Just a little background on me, why I was involved or how I got into the data center industry. It's always interesting to talk about these data center professionals because usually they start out doing something else or something that's in the building industry. Myself, I was doing a lot on the electrical and mechanical side with just buildings and sustainability. So when LEED first came out, and that's with like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, was the LEED Platinum building that was used as sort of the model. I had worked on that. I was part of that project. And from that, I went ahead and got my LEED certification, just dove in all the way, have the old long hair and everything and all of that. But that what led me towards data centers was an invitation to join a group that was specifically devoted to data centers. And that was in 2007 for me. They'd already been doing them for years and really perfecting a lot of what they were looking at. And all I thought of as data centers is saving energy. It's an oxymoron, right? Like it's like the opposite of what I'm trying to do. And they said, no, it's the next big thing. We want you to be part of that and help us. That was 2007, and they said, give us a year, let us know what you think. I was with that company for almost 10 years. We did a lot of projects, did a lot of government, did a whole slew of LEED projects, and it was really good. And then made some switches, and now I'm on the owner's side instead of the consulting side. And that's where the perspective is a little bit different. I don't have to worry about timesheets as much anymore, but I still have to worry about the same project results. It's still, but it feels like a little bit more control that I'm able to wield to say, okay, I was doing the consulting side before, and now I can help lead those consultants to get the results that we're all aiming for, but also try to knock down barriers for those consultants because they have great ideas or coming up with things. How about this? What about that? And I can either say, no, we've already done that, or that's fantastic. Let's do a little study on it, figure out if it's going to work for us in that classic business ownership kind of style to make sure that it's going to be not just good for what I think or what they think, it's going to be good for the business as well. And that way it helps me if there's leaders and such that I need to go ahead and approach with that. I can go ahead and sell that and make sure that we can go ahead and get the funds to get it through. So yeah, I guess that's enough on me on those aspects. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting because obviously data centers now play a very important role as we talk about the growth of AI, and we are obviously all consuming more data in the form of Netflix. We're doing Zoom calls. We're doing, we're living our lives remotely, and that all requires more data centers. And then there comes a discussion about, firstly, how do we fulfill the demand? There is a crazy demand for data centers right now, and making them sustainable with the right kind of energy requirement. How do you believe we can keep growing with the demand of the public and in B2C way and B2B as well? And how do we achieve that firstly, and how do we overcome this energy crisis we have at the moment?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? But let me
Pick
sort of
one
go
topic
in.
you like. Yeah, let's start with
Yeah,
one.
uh, I might work in a little bit reverse order. I, of course, is the two letters that have been talked about for what, a year and a half now or more. But it is one of those, okay, suddenly what is AI? Where is it? How is it supported? And of course, everybody starts to rediscover data centers, or if they haven't heard how the internet's supported and everything like that with cloud and everyone else, they're figuring that out and fast and how much energy is required for a lot of these facilities. But it is to say, look, we've had great leaders in a lot of these tech companies, the big tech companies that have said, you know what, we want to be sustainable, we want to be towards net zero. They set these goals, but then they're still saying, look, we still need to strive to be in the forefront of AI at the same time. So suddenly, while you're watching them invest towards AI, you're also watching them, on the other hand, invest heavily, even more heavily, towards the sustainability projects. And because they've been leading that, a lot of the people that they work with follow. And it's not just the normal consultants, but it's also like some of the other facilities that are big data center providers that they work with. They might live in those other data centers. And the idea is those teams, those facilities, they're also trying to do the same thing. So because it helps all those big tech companies meet their goals. So if they can start to make the same power purchase agreements, they start to say, okay, look, we can add solar panels on the roof of the data center. It's not even going to cover 1%, of the annual use of energy. It's just not. And that's realization. But the thing is, people are starting to say, well, wait a second, we have all these big hydroelectric dams all over the place. So we can do some of these choices when we're looking at facilities and locations, and we can start to say, okay, look, Alcoa built all of their facilities really near all of these hydroelectric because they realized they didn't want to have to pay for the infrastructure and the power for it. We don't have to reinvent some of those things. Let's go ahead and try to use what a lot of the industries have already done. But those facilities were sort of that level up. In other words, they had hundreds of megawatts that they were using, daily, weekly. The amount of energy used per year was just really high. Now we're seeing data centers were creeping up, and now it's kind of taken a whole step forward where AI has said, you know what, we're at that industrial level power use now. That's why a lot of people will say, let's look at nuclear. Yeah, that's one aspect, and yes, that'll get going, I'm sure. A lot of people are looking at that, but it's just going to be a while to get there with nuclear. Meanwhile, we're looking at how are all these other agreements going to help with, say, wind and solar. The other aspect to realize with a lot of the AI is it's not necessarily like a typical data center. And we've made a lot of strides where a lot of the trading data centers, you think of them like a facility that needs to stay up during the market hours, because if they go down during those market hours and people can't make their trades, they may as well close their doors. That's a very small percentage of data centers. Instead, a lot of facilities are doing, again, what the big tech companies have provided in having these large facilities. And if they have to take down a portion or the entire facility, yeah, okay, your search or your record keeping might take, a half a second longer, but they're able to provide that across that with that distribution. AI is starting to look a lot like that, where they might have to take down a facility or a portion of it, and they're not interested in having all those generators and everything like that to try to keep up all the time. They're okay with having some certain outages because we're starting to understand that power grid stability along with the energy stability. And that's starting to work out pretty well in the AI. So a lot of those facilities that you think of having just massive data centers and having all these generators operating, we're starting to get away from that a little bit, step by step, and getting more comfortable with operating with what we've got. And that leads again to being much more sustainable, of course. I'll stop there. I
No,
don't know if
this
there's
is
other,
great.
yeah, yeah.
This is great. I mean, what's interesting is I came across this company called Iris Energy in Australia, and they are 100% renewable energy driven data centers. And so it occurred to me, is that the future of data centers? Are we going to be looking at 100% renewable energy for data centers? Is that a reality or is that sort of too ambitious?
That's the goal for a lot of the, like we have all the like the sustainability practice members or the energy managers. That's the ultimate goal. They not only want to take the data centers and have everything renewable, they want to take the entire company that way. And it's not just, again, those big hyperscaler type companies, big tech. It's all the other types of facilities, data centers, and everyone else that is looking to understand and meet that target so that some of those bigger companies are also leading the way on those co-location companies, and they're saying this is how we're doing it, and they're being very open and transparent about it. And what's great is they're being rewarded for it. They're getting more business, and they're getting all sorts of accolades and rewards. And it's not just on the personal level, it's also the entire companies are being seen that. And you can watch as a lot of them are publicly traded, and you watch as their price just keeps ticking up because they keep doing the right things and keep being rewarded for it with more and more clients. And I think that that's I don't want to say that there's small players, Usually in the data center realm, like people that want to launch a new data center company have to show up with $1 billion, in order to launch or buy a bunch of data centers. But the idea is they take notice, they realize what it takes to get done, and they have to have that sustainability component that they're bringing on. So companies like that, I think, are really helping and feeding data centers to say, look, this is what we're providing over here. Let's link up and make sure that we're helping each other. I will say, like on a tangent, that a lot of these energy companies look at data centers and say, look, you promised that you'd be using 20 megawatts. You're only using 10 of it. You lied to me, like about my substation use. I built this giant substation for you, or whatever it might be. And they're saying, look, the load just hasn't come online. Those days don't really exist anymore, but it's still a holdover from, say, 10 years ago, where it was like a company would land a data center, they'd have everything built, but the utilities get leery and they wonder about how much that energy use is really going to show up. So the data centers can start to be more transparent about what they're going to use, and especially if we have that like the renewable energy companies, even as a facilitator to say, yes, we're going to need all these things, then we can start to say, yes, this data center is start to, we're going to be asking for this amount of peak power, and then our annual use keeps creeping up year over year as well. And we just need to make sure we can pull all the levers on that to make sure it's provided and we can be as sustainable as possible on all that energy use.
Really interesting that. I think you're right. I think we need to kind of keep aiming towards being more productive and but equally green because we only have one planet, right? We have to kind of something about this, right? One thing you mentioned earlier on was about AI being the culprit, taking a lot of energy consumption, and it's not alone. There's also crypto as well. There's a lot of energy to get things done. But AI is also perhaps a tool which can be used for, say, predictive maintenance in the data centers, for example. Are you seeing any use cases of AI in your world?
Absolutely. It's actually been going on for more than a decade. Some of those hyperscalers have been using it in their data centers and they're proud of it. And back then it was even just sort of touted as like, hey, it's just an improved if then statement. But it wasn't that. It was really an AI that was it was grabbing onto the systems that operate a data center. And that can be very scary for operators whose jobs rely on keeping that data center up and going. But they were really understanding what it meant to run a data center a little bit better. And it was starting to, some of these data centers, you see these case studies, you really, I wanted to know about the nitty gritty of like, okay, is it really, what are the choices that it's making and when? How is that algorithm working? Even if it is something simple like an if then, that's fine. But about 5 years ago, we really noticed, or I really noticed, AI was still really taking off in this field by grabbing on and understanding, look, if we open up our louvers for some free outdoor air cooling, how long does it take those louvers to open? What's the amount of air that we're looking at? Is it looking at not just the humidity and temperature, it's looking at particulates, or it's looking at some sort of other event. Maybe there's a forest fire, 10 miles away, or, maybe not big, but it's still worrisome for all of that equipment in the data center. It was looking at all of those things and was even saying, let's elevate temperatures and understanding how long it would take valves to react, cool down. If suddenly they looked at and saw the loads of the data center were, maybe only 30, 50, 60% of that total. But then they noticed like everybody's logging on or whatever. And you mentioned like Netflix. Netflix is a huge user, yes, but until I started to understand, like the city of Baltimore, for example, every day produces a larger catalog than the entire Netflix, and they do that every day for all their cameras. It's not that they're being used all the time, but you still need all that data to flow and everything. And it might go into deep storage for a month, but the idea is all that starts to be huge, and when you're trying to react to that, suddenly that ramp up of all that data coming in, you need to ramp up all of your mechanical systems. And the AI would be able to see that, understand that, and learn and reset or resequence that time in order to make sure that it could respond accordingly. So we're seeing a lot of that, and I would expect just more and more depth to that, especially as we're looking to add more valve, like just everything, all the sensors, valves, any of those conditions on any of the electrical equipment as well. We're probably going to see a lot more of that, or that's my own personal thought anyway, we'll see a lot more of that on the controls in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can see why, AI has been used and will be used in the future. And obviously, one thing which we love in the tech industry, the data center industry, is acronyms, AI. Another one which is really popular is IoT, Internet of Things. It's been around for years, some might say for decades, in one way or the other. Are you seeing a lot of application of IoT in data centers where you work, or perhaps in your experience? Is IoT being used quite a bit? Do you think that's something which we should be using more of?
I think it's the opportunities are there, but again, it comes back to the base cases for those IoT. A lot of users that might be in somebody else's data center, I would look for them to say, look, we don't want to have somebody out there on the site. We don't want to have worry about the pipeline or this or that. Go ahead and give us all that IoT to monitor the equipment, monitor all the systems, and therefore they don't have to have anybody show up at any time. They can just monitor it from their basement or wherever they're going to be doing it from, and they can just work from there. And then if they want more granularity, they can work with those providers to get that granularity and go ahead and on their next deployment, just make sure to add more IoT, add everything else that's going to be going with it. And we're starting to see that from the vendors as well, where the end users are looking at it like, look, we have this much energy use, but we'd really like to understand, how much we're really getting, how much are we paying for on that provider versus how much energy we're really using. So they're asking their end vendors to say, give me this, this power distribution unit that I can plug into that'll tell me exactly, how much power draw is on each one of my servers. And when was I on the A side or on the B side? Does it even matter? How often did the power go down or anything like that? And therefore they pull that in that granularity. And you might have heard about those deep lakes of information. It just goes into that deep lake, and then they ask like a Splunk or somebody to go ahead and sift through that, find that information, and figure out how that can be done. Another AI application right there, just waiting to happen. You know what? Just throw it all at the AI, let it handle it all. It's going to find out if if a certain system or sensor is down. It's going to alert somebody. It's going to let people know what the use is. And it's going to look, of course, for those anomalies that people are aiming to find, especially on any break fixes. Break fix is not really what people want to have anymore in data centers. They want to be able to sense when things are going awry, fix it well in advance, or just even to understand, like, nobody's paid attention to this, that this giant, unit over here, this switch gear over here that's been operating for 10 years. When's the last time we tested that or even recommissioned it? So it is starting to get us as an industry paying attention to more of that. So again, if we are starting to do that, we don't have to do as much or rely as much on those backup systems for those emergencies. We can start to rely on just the systems we have, and maybe be more comfortable with having less redundancy instead of a n plus one where n is three. That n starts to be 7, 8, 9, 10, and we start to get used to not having generators all over the place too.
Very interesting. Obviously, it clearly shows that there is that kind of push towards automation more and more. So the less human intervention, IoT, remote monitoring, AI to actually get the action done. There seems to be a drive towards spending less money and the data centers being more efficient. Are you seeing that as a big driver or a big KPI in your work?
Yeah, the cost item was always the big seller whenever we were looking at doing this for efficiency. Even when I was starting out as a career, it was always get the most efficient equipment. It's going to save you more energy. So we would always be aiming for that. Yes, it might cost a 10% premium, or it might have to come from across country, across the world, or wherever it comes from. But the idea is we would look at that in that cost benefit analysis and say, look, if you can withstand like a 3 year, 4 or 5 year payback, we should absolutely do this because it's going to start paying back every single month. And whenever you're looking at that on the efficiency for a data center and you realize that, hey, it's not just my data center, my people that are living in here are living with this, it's also other people's and they're paying those bills as well. We can be more attractive and pass along a lot of those savings. It just looks more attractive to everybody. if you can start to do all those things. But it does go back to the amount of energy equals the amount you pay. So absolutely, every kilowatt hour that you can save is going to be beneficial. So it's always trying to eke that out, month over month. So
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, yep, yeah. Go ahead, man. Yeah.
No, so, sorry, I cut you off. Please continue, and we'll go from there. Anything else you want to add
I
there,
I
John?
was Yeah, I was going to just add in PUE was one of those main metrics. It was also coming out, power usage effectiveness, and it was always used sort of like and one of the things that I've looked at is we're only using it internally, but we're always measuring against our own internal. Unfortunately, and we're trying to change this sort of across the industry, we should keep that in comparison to ourselves, but it is a nice metric when people are trying to talk about or convey, how the systems are performing versus the utility power versus that IT power. And the idea is if we can start to look at how much utility power overall, and that's where that energy savings really comes from, that's where we need to start targeting and use that PUE term correctly as well. So it's not just about powering down that IT equipment, it's powering down everything that we can start to bring down, across all the systems. So even though I might look at the facility side, a lot of people are looking at the IT side as well. And that's forced me to look at the IT side and ask, how are people doing that? What's the latest on the efficiency of these servers and what those next steps are there? So as we're looking for the future across data centers, what's that most efficient equipment? I just want to make sure that I wasn't missing out like the latest IT equipment as well. And that goes for IoT, servers, you name it, everything. Yeah.
It's fascinating because obviously we talk about data centers, we talk about energy. I've embarked on a PhD in AI 20 years back, and back then I couldn't I would never have imagined that we reached the level of sophistication and availability of AI as we have today. And it's thanks to the data centers, the GPUs, maybe the LPUs. I mean, all the PUs which are coming out in the market today. But a big driver, according to the gurus, the NVIDIAs, et cetera, is that the cost of computation is going to keep going down. And we'll
Hmm.
see the prices go down to a tenth to 100 of what it is. And if you look at, for example, ChatGPT's latest algorithm or latest version, it's cheaper than the previous version. So it's already getting cheaper and cheaper. And a big cost for them is the energy. So that comes down to
Hmm.
energy data centers. Do you believe we can really go down to a tenth of the price to what we have right now in the coming years? Do you think that's actually a possibility? Or is that sort of
Yeah, well, that's where I leave that to the economists, right? And those that have been looking at those stats. But I would point to, do you remember like whenever personal computers, came out and all of those things and companies would buy them and then they'd have it there and they were running 3 shifts every day. That machine was always operating. Then it got more and more and the price just started to bottom out. It would be, I think people in the industry like to use car analogies a lot, be like having a Ferrari, that's, whatever it is now, 50,000, $100,000, and it would be dropping down to the price of a computer, a couple thousand. So the idea is we would want to see where that sort of drops. I don't think it's impossible, but because the energy costs are a little bit unknown or a little bit they can be a heavy burden. I would just look for that to try to improve overall. And as the sustainability energy starts to drive those prices down, we might be able to get those like the overall prices down as well. That would complement that like any AI prices that are out there.
understood? Absolutely makes sense. I think at the end of the day, be able to reach those levels, it's just good for everybody in the ecosystem. We'll be using more, we'll be doing it faster, better, cheaper. It's always a win-win for everybody involved, isn't it?
Yeah, that's hopefully the goal. Yeah, just make sure that we can keep going on that efficiency train, right? So let's just keep it chugging along.
That's brilliant. So obviously we talked about AI, we talked about IoT, we talked about energy, we talked about cost going down. Is there any other trend you're seeing in the data center world, green data centers, sustainability, which we believe is something we should highlight to our listeners and our viewers?
I've looked to see, there's been a lot of proposed different types of data centers out there. I would say a lot of people think, well, a certain industry, they get convergent, that you start to see a lot of the same things. This industry, I would say, is divergent. So there's a lot of those different hyperscalers that are heading off with their own types of designs because they have very specific needs. We might see a lot more of that. And the idea is we have a lot of sustainable solutions on the engineering and facility side, architects and engineers. We need to go ahead and leverage a lot of those solutions and bring them in. We might see this new, mind-blowing technology about this here or there. It's time to start applying that and understand how is this going to help like a small data center or an edge data center, or where are we going to see a floating data center or more underwater data centers. The other thing is let's go ahead and skip the middleman of the power company for things like cooling. Let's go ahead and use water such as lakes, rivers, and ocean water for our direct cooling. It's what industrial uses. We should start thinking about that, especially in these large facilities, of doing the same. So there's a lot of different aspects to pay attention to out there, especially on the green front. But I'll be following it, just as closely, I think, on this going forward as well.
Well, I mean that's fascinating, isn't it? Because the actual byproduct of data centers is energy and heat, which could then be sold to get some other bits done, right? So that's really interesting as well, that you actually emit stuff which can be used again.
Well, it depends. In the United States, we use a lot of steam systems on the distribution for those older systems we have. Me, I'm in DC. I've worked on these steam systems, and to get the heat out, that rejection heat that we'd be looking for is really hard. It takes a lot of energy in order to bring it up to be used with that district heating system. However, there's a lot that we're learning from Sweden, Norway, others, especially in the Nordics, because they are, of course, are reusing that heat. Yes, it takes energy to reclaim that heat, but they're able to reuse it on a lot of their systems. So we're looking to do the same and try to, I don't want to say steal the heat, but definitely take that heat, reuse it where possible, and see about those applications because this is overall for data centers more of a low grade heat. So it's not something that's, if you want to think of like a first or second degree burn, it's not like that. It's kind of like an uncomfortable heat. We need to see about running data centers at a like scorching heat. Hey, we're that rotisserie chicken at Costco that's been under that heating lamp. That's the kind of heat that we want to be using. That's that heat that that level or that heat temperature that we want to start using in our data centers.
That's phenomenal. That's a very interesting area. I think hopefully there's something you can develop further in the future, looking at the Nordics as you talked about earlier. But really interesting conversation with John. Where can we
Mhm.
find more about you on the World Wide Web? Where can we locate you and communicate with you?
I run a website, greendatacenterguide.com, and you can just run that all four words together. I also have greendatacenterfinder.com, and they're coupled together. So if you're looking, if you have specialty needs on specific data center topics, I'm happy to help out through the Green Data Center Guide. But if you're looking for some of that data center connections to understand what's a good, better, or best data center, what's going to be more attractive for me, my company, or just our even sustainability image, that's fine. We can talk about the Green Data Center Finder, and we can even start there to say, let's put a comparison together for you to figure out what's going to be good for you, as well as what might be, maybe you want to pay an extra premium in order to have a great data center image with some of these companies that are out there. So I'm there, but I'm around the industry, and if you ever make it over to Washington, D.C. area, feel free if you want a data center tour of Northern Virginia, happy to give it any time as well.
Thank you, John, for the generous offer. I might take you up on the offer actually. So,
Yeah, yeah,
thanks
anytime.
a ton for getting on the podcast. Really good to have you on the Goodman Podcast. We look forward to perhaps having you again on to talk a little bit more about the future of sustainable data centers.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thanks again, Raj.
Thank you.